Some of you may want to read more about it. Let me recommend some things to you. Again, if you want something very readable, street level, O'Reilly's book is not a bad book. It's looking at Jesus, his life, and then Rome during his lifetime. So, good readable. Again, these are great stories as far as I'm concerned, but good readable books. So Bill O'Reilly's Killing Jesus. If you want to know more about the Roman Republic, this is a book that's currently out. You can go to Barnes & Noble and pick it up. It's titled The Rise of Rome by Anthony Everett. Anthony Everett, The Rise of Rome. You can write down any of this stuff after we finish up. I'll put these back on the table. But very readable text. Don't be worried about over your head stuff. Just very readable, street level, popular audience kind of text. So, and it will run you all the way through the Republic. Lots of great details. I picked up some stuff I didn't know. I can read through that this spring. This one's also available now. Greg Wolf's book, Rome and Empire's Story. It's not quite chronological. It's more topical, but still good. It's a little heady. If you're worried about being talked down to, then maybe not. But it's not way up there either. But again, more about just the empire as opposed to the republic. Okay. 12 Caesars. On good standard work. This one by Matthew Dennison. So he's actually writing about the 12 Caesars. It's not the 12 Caesars that we think of in terms of the primary source, but he's writing about all 12 of the Caesars, beginning with Julius Caesar, then ending with Marcus Aurelius. Again, a good readable text. A lot of good info in that one too. This is out. This is very current. This is Barry Strauss's book. If you want to know more about Caesar, the death of Caesar, he runs you through painstaking details about the assassination of Caesar. That gives you a lot of background in his history, all kinds of things. But as far as just kind of a blow by blow, step by step, moving across Rome toward the Forum. What was happening here and there, what was happening. But it's gripping probably in the word, but again, detail after detail after detail. Yeah.
Give me a good word or a short sentence on the description of what the Forum was.
The Forum is the picture on the far end down here. The Forum is where, think of it in terms of the mall in Washington, D.C., the Capitol, Lincoln Memorial, or Washington Monument, Lincoln Memorial, Jefferson Memorial, Library of Congress, Folger Library is up there on that far end by the Capitol. Just all those buildings that are kind of concentrated. Think about what would be lost if an atomic bomb hit that. It just destroys. It just destroys so many buildings connected to the government, our history, the art, the Smithsonian, all those kinds of things. Think of those contexts. Although it's more political than anything else.
We've seen it, but I never did understand why each one of them had to build something for themselves.
You know how men are. Come on, ladies, back me up. You know how men are. Well, at least they built something new. The way the Egyptians often did stuff is they'd take something that was already built, they'd scratch off the name of the guy who built it and put their name on it. How come it's so old? So you can't always trust what's carved on the sides of Egyptian monuments, but anyway. That's a good question, too. Again, the Forum is more about political stuff. It's where you gather to discuss things politically. Where the Senate's located, then temples and all kinds of stuff. So, again, just kind of ground zero for the Roman Empire. The Republic, too, prior to that, the Roman Empire. And then becomes a symbol, of course. Once Rome begins to decline, the city itself, then the Forum becomes a symbol of that decline. Because ultimately, you're talking about a Rome that devolves down to a place where maybe 50,000 people live, where it's a million people city. Think about that. You can't begin to run a city. Think about a million. Well, what's a million population city? What's Denver? Kansas City. Denver a million? Let's say Denver's a million people. Let's say eventually we've got to keep running Denver the way Denver runs, including the airport, with 50,000 people in the whole city. You can't do it. It's not possible. You cannot do it. So the city of Rome, the Forum itself, becomes a place that's indicative of decline and just fall. And a shadow of what it used to be. Just a shell of what it used to be. This glorious place, carved out of marble. When Augustus Caesar left the throne, he said, "I inherited Rome of brick, I left it a Rome of marble."
I think last month's National Geographic, they had a good picture of that. Great hands, tower.
Against the wall, or straight to the column.
The tower.
Yeah, the column.
It's a good one.
Yeah, and that reminds me, some of you have been asking about the pictures up here. Of course, we all know the Coliseum, we'll talk about in just a sec. This is a sculpture of the Praetorian Guard, so you're looking at the kind, these guys who protect the emperor directly. That's a very common, very popular way to depict those guys. We don't know the names of these two people. I think they're 2nd century AD, as I recall. You may know differently. I think that's 2nd century AD. But just extraordinary detail. I think we're looking at a guy where if we saw him in the street, we'd know him immediately. I don't think this is just a vague depiction of just the average Roman. I think these are specific people. And just the detail, and because it's hard to get a painting from the ancient world into modern times. That's just so problematic. Sculpture is another thing. But even that, a lot of those guys get their nose busted off somewhere along the way. Somebody doesn't like this guy, so they bust his nose off. But to get a painting, that's hard. Frescoes sometimes are the best way to do that, where they paint on wet plaster, and it's just embedded in the material. These actually, I think, painted on wood. At least that one is. This is a mosaic from Israel, northern part of Israel. It's depicting what? Loaves and fishes. Yeah, story of loaves and fishes. Jerry, can you talk about this one down here more?
That's one of the most famous icons in Eastern Orthodoxy. It's called the Pantocrator, Christ, the all-powerful, almighty. There are several versions of it. The oldest existing one is 6th or 7th century. The tradition goes back much further, but most of those were destroyed in iconoclastic wars of the 8th and 9th century. But you'll see that all over in Eastern Orthodoxy. The tomb of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, up at the very top center, you can see that icon there. That's
Talk about the hand.
Pardon?
Talk about the hand.
The hand is, right hand raised in blessing. You have the IC on one side, which is the first and last letters of Jesus. You've got the first and last letters of Christ on the right-hand side, and then his fingers are raised in a sign of blessing, which is associated with Pope New. He blesses, also raised to represent letters for Jesus Christ. Holding the Gospels in his left hand, crossed on the cover of the book, representing the 4 Gospels.
And a big controversy about whether or not he should be holding up 2 fingers or 3.
Yeah, in some versions of this, you'll see his pinky and ring finger are crossed for the chi, the Christ letter, the X. Other letters that are straight represent something else. And so there's a big controversy about how that should be painted exactly, and wars were fought over that.
At least in the church, we split over serious things.
Yes.
And the forum is the far picture, obviously in ruins, but that's how it is. That's actually photographed from today. So, who's been to Rome? I haven't asked all week. Who's been to Rome? Wow, somebody asked me how many times I've been to Rome. I said, I never have. So, but I always talk about things I don't have any idea what I'm talking about. So, it kind of works out. Okay. I've got 45 minutes or so to finish up this whole bit. Let's look at the Colosseum. Again, you guys know about a lot of this, I think, already. Colosseum, down here on the far left, we're talking about a 50,000 person theater, 45,000 seats, the room for 5,000 SRO, standing room for those guys. 80 different, just again, engineering marvel. I mean, 80 different entrances and exits so that you could literally empty out this building in 20 minutes. It's fantastic stuff. I mean, yeah, everything's free there. Yeah, this is just the bread and circus and stuff. Free food, free games. You'll also see how much the state comes to rely on these games to keep people pacified. You'll see that in Claudius, we've got 93 days of games. By the time you get to the 300s, they had increased to 175 days, about every other day equivalent for games. So they didn't run that way, but still, that's games almost all the time. Keep people pacified, entertained. A lot of this is blood sport. I mean, you guys know a lot about those kinds of things. But remember, too, with the Colosseum, they didn't just do gladiatorial stuff. They would do mock battles. They had this thing set up, so, and the floor's all gone now. You can't see that in the picture. The floor is gone, so it's kind of hard to visualize, but with the floor originally there, they could flood the floor. They could have mock sea battles inside the Coliseum. I mean, it's really pretty cool stuff. By the way, not exactly round. It's a little elliptical, more egg-shaped than that. But still, you can still get a good feel for it. Had an awning that came out. We're not even sure exactly how they did that, but a big awning that we just ran around the top perimeter to shade a lot of these folks during the games. Again, we're not even sure how they rigged that thing up. For certain, there's a lot of theories, but we don't even know. Look, to be a gladiator is crazy work. You don't live very long. As your film said the other day, the average guy died at age 23. Some of these guys become big deals, big rock star, you know, kind of NASCAR kinds of equivalent. Well, whatever works for you, I don't know. NASCAR is usually enough. But you get the point. A lot of them slaves, not all of them know, but again, the vast majority would be slaves, so there's no choice here. They would become very adept at certain kinds of weapons. Usually a guy would have a favorite weapon. So when you went into the arena, you know, you may be the guy wielding a sword and you got a net, and maybe the other guy's got a trident or something else. And so he's going to fight a certain way, you're going to fight a certain way, and there may be an advantage that comes to that accordingly. Some of it's also just about skill. At the end of the games, if it's going to be a death match, then sometimes the audience or the emperor will make the decision. It's my understanding, by the way, the thumbs up stuff, it's actually the reverse of what we think it is. This meant kill him, this meant let him live. To us, it would be the opposite. Also, if a gladiator was wounded and maybe couldn't get up on his own, then the decision would be made, okay, do we let him live? Did he fight valiantly? Or does he deserve to die? And if it's death, then typically you would have this guy, Charon, somebody dressed up like the ferryman in the underworld, Charon, okay? And then he would come out with a big mallet, and he would just bash the guy's head. So, I assume the helmet came off first, and then he would bashed in. So that's your reality shows. Again, this is all about entertainment. Now, I don't know where we're headed with our entertainment, but let's not get to that point. But anyway. Let's go back to the church. Let's go back to the church. Look, as the Roman Empire is developing and growing, so is the church. These things run parallel. Remember, the beginning of the empire almost exactly matches the beginning of the church within a generation. And they're going to be parallel one another. One giving support to the other, the empire ultimately helping the church expand because of the nature of the empire. But again, also these times when the church is going to be persecuted by the empire. I think initially the simplicity of the church was something I think comes from inspiration, but also I think is about people anticipating the return of Jesus very soon, very soon. So there's no real need for anything very elaborate here. We don't need anything very involved. We don't need to build any buildings. This is going to be pretty simple stuff. He's going to be back in no time flat. Just hang on. Let's just stay faithful, and it'll all be over soon. Well, as time passes, I think, we have the church that realizes, okay, maybe it's not going to be tomorrow. Maybe we need to get a little bit more organized. I'm not saying good, bad, or indifferent. I'm just saying this is what happens. And so what we get here ultimately is the simplicity of the church. The fact that the church is built around elders as leaders. And then the church becomes larger, becomes something that has to be handled. It has to be, they presume, has to be administrated. So that's going to then, for them, require this stratification of leadership. And so we get the beginnings of what becomes a much larger administrative framework for the church. We all know, we all begin as elders. How many elders we got here, by the way? Elders. We start out with elders. Every congregation would have elders. And then we reach a point where, and this happens pretty quickly, by the 2nd century at least, where they're considering, well, you know, these elders that are elders in places like big cities with bigger churches, kind of mega church or a mother church equivalent, we probably need to make those guys something different. Make those guys bishops. So you might be in some small little congregation someplace and you're going to be an elder. If you're the elder over a larger congregation, like over several congregations in a large city, then you may be appointed as a bishop. Now, all these are words that we use in the Old Testament, the New Testament, for an elder. elder, bishop, shepherd, presbyter, overseer. Now, these are all the same thing. But they then take these terms and apply them to specific stratification of leadership. Beyond that, you take a region or province. Then you're going to have provinces with dioceses. Then you're going to have an archbishop over that. It's just the larger. Look, what happens here is, in some respects, the church is co-opting the political structures of Rome and making them ecclesiastical structures within the church. You don't have to like it, but that's what happens. And so we get this again from elders to bishop, archbishop, to patriarchs. There'll be a handful of those guys. And then the fuss is, well, which one of us is the most important? Because you know how men are. And this becomes about power. And ultimately, this becomes about power. You can ask a question.
The first distinction between elder and bishop outside the New Testament scripture is with Ignatius of Antioch, who was bishop.
Ignatius of Antioch, who was bishop.
And he was martyred in
Second century?
AD 117.
Yeah. Early second century.
Yeah.
Yeah. This doesn't wait very long before they start doing the stratification structure. We can fuss about biblical, not biblical. We can fuss about what's the leadership. We can fuss about that all we want to. But for these folks, this is how it works. Again, once you reach the point where you have these big mega churches in mega cities and these more important cities, places like Rome, Jerusalem, Constantinople, Antioch, Alexandria, those would be the top ones. And then there's going to be this fuss about, well, which one of us is the real most important one? Because that's where we get our Pope label from eventually, it's father figure eventually. And that's going to be, of course, the one in Rome. The patriarch in Rome would say, well, hang on. I mean, come on, I'm in Rome. You guys are in Timbuktu. You guys are in Schmo nowhere. I'm the guy in Rome. And of course, as we're going to see in just a bit, when part of the Roman Empire's political structure shifts to what we call Constantinople, to the old city of Byzantium, the old Greek trading colony of Byzantium, then you've got two capitals for Rome. And so the patriarch in Rome says, well, I'm the big dog. And the patriarch in Constantinople said, yeah, you're the has-been. Nobody gives two hoots about Rome anymore. It's all about Constantinople now. So I'm the main guy. Of course, we know where this ultimately leads us to is a split within Christendom. So we get a Roman Catholic church in the west, and we get an Orthodox church in the east. Now, there'll be other splits too. Coptics in Egypt and things like that. But this is part of this is just almost a natural progression of events within the church because it mirrors the empire. And especially, too, when you consider that Roman imperial power is ultimately going to wane. We all know the rule about power. Power never functions in a vacuum. So if power declines somewhere, and imperially in Rome, politically in Rome, because the empire is going to decline, it's going to be a long decline, then I think part of the slack is picked up by the church. Ecclesiastical power will go on the rise. So as the empire declines, the church ascends. And ultimately the church will ascend, I think, to the point to where it's really almost superior to it, ultimately superior to the empire. Ultimately, the empire gives up. Ultimately, the empire says, okay, fine. We can't kill Christianity, so we'll take it in. And we'll see a little bit more about that here coming up. Okay, let's define the empire. Again, once we get past Marcus Aurelius, once we get into the 3rd century, the 200s AD, then we start seeing some pretty serious declines taking place. We've got lousy leadership, terrible emperors. We get guys that are almost always generals. You'll see this guy named Septimius Severus, late 100s, coming into the early 3rd century. A guy who just said, look, you just have to keep the military happy. It's all you got to do. Keep your soldiers happy. You'll see the quote here. I think you'll see the quote here. Yeah, there it is. Make the soldiers rich. He tells it to his son. Make the soldiers rich and don't trouble about anything else. Nothing else is important. Just pay off your troops. You'll be fine. Okay, that seems like 100 miles away from the days of the good emperors. Seems 100 miles away from the days of Julius Caesar, the days of Augustus Caesar. These guys don't care about anything but themselves. It's all about holding power. And then you just have this revolving door that takes place. You see the next paragraph or so, the next half century, we're going to see in about 50 years' time, just terrible years for the empire, horrible leadership, collapses within the empire in terms of systems. You'll see 26 emperors in about 50 years. They're usually called the barracks emperors. They're almost always generals. And the revolving, think about that. 26 emperors in a half century, the revolving door of leadership. Some of them are in for a few years, some of them are in for months, and they get off by the next guy. I mean, assassination is just going to be rampant here. Now, this is where it's starting to matter for Rome, because Rome has reached its maximum size. It's now experiencing what we call hypertrophy. You have a, look, we're going to get down here in a bit to why did Rome fall? I'm going to give you a dozen reasons for that. We could list 100. I'm going to give you 12. And there are even subcategories probably within those 12. But one of the reasons for the collapse is Rome just wears itself out. Look, empires are organic institutions because they're human-based. They have a lifespan. They've got youth, they grow up, middle age, they get old, they get tired, they get worn out, they've served their purpose. And then something else comes into place. What's that? Are you feeling it, Marilyn? Is that? You know what I mean, Marilyn? We all know this. This is a lifespan of a human being. And empires have to say, look, no empire lasts forever. No human political institution lasts forever. Excuse me, including this empire. Now, this happens slowly. It happens in pieces. It happens in dribs and drabs. It happens, we all know this, we all know the preacher story about the frog in the pot of water. We all know that story. I've always wanted to find out whether that's a true story. Is that actually how it works or not? Does anybody know for sure if that's what happens with frogs? We've all heard the story a dozen times. But look, that story about the frog in the pot of water, where you just incrementally turn the temperature up a little bit at a time, and eventually the frog is cooked and never knows it till it's too late. Now, when we talk about the Roman Empire collapsing, we can see people from time to time who see it. We're going to talk about Diocletian here in just a bit, late 3rd century. He sees it. He sees that they've declined. He sees we're not what we used to be. He sees we better rescue this thing fast, we're going to lose it all. And he comes up with some approaches to help take care of that. And I think ultimately destroy the empire even that much quicker. But look, when we talk about Rome declining and people not even knowing it, which is typically the case here, think about that. Because it happens such a long, slow spiral, you might not even notice in your own lifetime. Let me ask you a question, give you a perspective. Take our country. I always ask my Western Civ students this. The United States. Is the United States today at a point where your concept of the future of this country is bright? That it's best coming up. We haven't even seen the best yet. Our glory days are ahead of us. There's so much cool stuff going to happen, we can't even imagine it's going to be so great. We haven't even begun to peak yet. Or is your view that we have seen our day, we've had our golden period, the United States is not going to be much longer, it's not going to be the power it used to be, we've had it, we've seen it, it's going to be somebody else in the future, we're going to become a second-rate, secondary power, we're on our way out. I'm seeing more heads saying that than I'm seeing to the other. Do you know that?
No.
None of us can sit here and prove either of those positions. We don't know. You may see things happen in your lifetime, and you interpret those as, well, this isn't what it used to be. This isn't as good, or oh, for the good old days, those kinds of things. Look, everybody says, oh, for the good old days, no matter how good or bad the old days were. A lot of that is they forget the bad stuff.
I always thought it was interesting that the American dollar can be spent anywhere in the world. The Russian people can't even spend outside of Russia.
Yeah.
And so, and our money is not backed by gold anymore, so the only thing that makes our money viable is the stability.
Good credit of the American government.
That's the only thing.
That's an oxymoron.
Yeah, we can sit here and fuss about this back and forth all day, but again, we don't know. don't know what 50 years from now is going to be like. We don't know what 100 years from now is going to be like. We don't know what 20 years from now is going to be like. We do not know. There could be fantastic stuff ahead. We just don't know. We may have peaked. We don't know.
We don't want to be a little too upset about that because this college is a pretty good example of people not really knowing what's going to happen, but
Well,
it
yeah.
happens. So the result can be good if you have good people.
Oh, yeah, you're saying the result could be good like the college if you got good people. I do.
I think there's a couple things. One is good leadership makes a difference.
Good leadership makes a difference.
Yeah, but I think also that if our nation does not begin to fear God and repent, that we don't have a right to fear.
I'm saying we're losing our connection with God in this country. I've got to keep moving. We'll talk about some of these things as we go on. But that's what's happening here is decline, the decline that runs slowly. It's almost sometimes imperceptible to these people. But what we're seeing here is that the central government, the Roman government may be sometimes close to, it seems like absolute collapse, but it doesn't. It keeps moving on, keeps moving along. Nevertheless, we are going to see a lot of chaos, disruption, civil wars repeatedly, invasions, creeping invasion from the outside. There's going to be more of that as these centuries pass by. We're going to see the systems become less stable. We're going to see parts of the empire where it's just insecure. It's just not as good as it used to be. We're going to see a lot more pirates. We're going to see more highwaymen, a lack of law and order, those kinds of things. Life just becomes a bit more tenuous. It becomes a lot more localized, too. Remember, the Roman Empire constructed 250,000 miles of roads, and that allows for great trade systems and hundreds of shipping ports and just all kinds. Look, we're going to reach a point here where a lot of what Rome is about is people living much more localized. They're not sure they can get from point A to point B. They're not sure they can get from this city to this city without being robbed, so they stay home. Trade systems begin to unravel. Again, trade is something where you got to back that up. It's almost impossible to have an extensive trade system on this planet without a good, powerful, viable navy to back it up. I mean, that's just the way it works. Because there's always somebody ready to take your lunch money. And so we see ultimately, maybe the parts are all there, but maybe it's about parts as opposed to the whole. Maybe it was never about the whole, ultimately. Maybe there's this good run for a century or so, and you hit on all cylinders, and they're lucky they got even that. Because we're just reaching this point where just because of all the pressures that come with the size of the empire, the scope of the empire, it's hard to hold this thing together. Look, it's hard to run the United States today. With all the instant communication we've got, all the great systems, I mean, it's hard, it seems like, to hold everything together. Especially without good leadership on the editorial aspect, okay? We're going to see much more, with the lack of trade or decline of trade, we're going to see life becoming more difficult on a local level. We're going to see shortages. We're going to see economic problems. We're going to see inflation. We're going to see the debasement of coinage. That's a huge deal. Look, they may have brought in gold and silver from everywhere else. They may have stolen everybody else's bunch of money, but now reaching the point where a lot of that's gone out. It's paid out in other stuff. It's gone to other places. People are stashing it. They're going to store it away. Excuse me. They're going to not put their money in banks. They're going to bury it in their backyard. In connection with that, let me take a 2-minute break here. And where's our basket of coins? Where'd that one go? Go ahead. I brought y'all something today. I want to leave you with something to take home with you. Everybody, every couple or individual, we're going to give you some coins. There are 2 coins in here. One is a replica of a denarius. Okay? Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Most of these are from the time of Augustus. Okay, they're replicas. Some are from the time of Hadrian, which is a good emperor. I think we can just pass this like communion, can't we? Can we just pass this around? Every couple or individual will take a packet. The other coin is an actual Roman coin. It's at least 1,700 years old. It's one of these, it's just dug up in somebody's backyard. People buried their money all the time. Again, they got to where they didn't trust the bank. So archaeologists find treasure troves like this all the time. So we're going to hand out coins to you. Again, the one that's the cleanest looking, that's the replica. The other one's an actual coin for you. So we want you to have that. And pass that around. Anyway, I'll try to keep talking at the same time. So hope you enjoy that. By the time we get to the mid-200s, mid-3rd century, we've got, look, we've got a big system, lots of cities, but again, it's not running much in terms of a complete system. Now we're going to get, and part of that again is about bad leadership. Now we're going to get a guy who comes in as emperor who says, this has got to stop. And this is our guy named Diocletian. Diocletian sees the decline. He interprets it pretty correctly, I think. He says, we've got to get this system fixed. How are we going to repair the empire to make the empire run more efficiently? Part of his answer to that, and by the way, Diocletian is a harsh, harsh persecutor of Christians. He sees that them as part of the problem. We've got to cut this Christianity out. It's killing us. It's undermining us every time we turn around. We've got to crush the Christians. So the persecution, we can talk about first century persecution of the church, and it's sometimes dramatic. I think it's more dramatic here in the late 3rd century with Diocletian than at any other time in the church's history.
How many of these guys were actually educated, or did some slave read it to them? And how did that affect what happened?
Most of these guys are educated enough. Most of them come from the upper class. Some of them aren't. Some of them are troops. Some of them are general. Sometimes that means they might actually be illiterate. Do you have to be able to read to run the empire? Yeah. I don't know. I can address it very well.
Who was educated by Seneca, was it?
Nero. Yeah, he's asked me who was educated by Seneca, one of the great Roman philosophers of the time during the 1st century. Well, Nero was, but that obviously was not a lesson learned. I mean, he could have got such great wisdom and insight from his teacher, he didn't pay enough attention to it. Eventually, he had Seneca killed. So if you ever had a teacher you didn't like, yeah. Okay, Diocletian. Diocletian looks at the empire and says, we've got to fix it. Here's his overarching answer to the problem, okay? And it is this. We're going to save it by cutting it in two. And that sounds crazy, but his view was, it's too big, it's not manageable, let's cut it in half, it'll still be the empire, but let's administrate it as two halves rather than one whole. Does that make sense? Okay, it might not, but anyway, I think ultimately it doesn't really help the empire at the end of the day. So what he's going to do is divide the empire, and I want you to get a view of how. Excuse me, can I get some water? Do real fast. The western half, here, all this yellow or buff, whatever the color is, pretty much from the heel of the boot, okay? That's include what used to be Yugoslavia, some of the Balkan states, things like that. And then everything west of that, and then that part of northern Africa, accordion, and then everything purple here, all the wine color, I guess, here, the grape color, over the west, or the east. So the western half of the empire, and the eastern half of the empire. Ultimately, there's going to be two capitals. Rome will still remain as a capital, although later on, Rome actually gets abandoned as a capital. Thank you. And then the capital established in the east will become Constantinople. Later on, it's going to be called something else originally. The old Byzantine Greek trade, yeah.
One of the reasons Christians were persecuted was not because they were bad people, but because Diocletian could see the decline of Rome. He said, because we've abandoned our gods, we need to get back to the good old days, worship the gods of Rome we traditionally worship, instead of these new ideas coming in here, and then we'll make Rome a powerful nation again.
Yeah.
It's a very conservative policy.
Yeah. He's got some. I think he's got his finger on the pulse on a lot of this stuff. But again, dividing the empire. Look, you can divide the empire and say we still have a superstructure umbrella over all of it, but eventually the mindset becomes what? There are two empires. And the way that he does this too is to share rules, sort of. He doesn't really give them any power. But he's going to establish himself as the ruler in the eastern half of the empire, a guy named Maximian in the western half of the empire, Rome, and then he's going to operate over what becomes later Constantinople. He's actually outside of the city at first, and then moves into what becomes later Constantinople. Maximian has the title of Augustus. Diocletian has the title of emperor. Theoretically, they are co-rulers with equal power. It's not really about that. Diocletian holds really the real power. Then they're going to have a co-ruler in each half, so there's what's called a tetrarchy, 4-man rule. Although again, Diocletian really is the one in charge. Each of the secondary guys is going to be called a Caesar. So you've got an Augustus, an emperor, and then 2 Caesars. And then you'll also see the way this hammers out is they divide up the empire in terms of regions called dioceses. We all, it doesn't take a genius to figure out, the church, the Roman Catholic Church, will co-opt that political structure into an ecclesiastical structure. The dioceses today aren't about how Italy is ruled, it's about how the Roman Catholic Church is set up. Okay? Then each of those headed by a vicar. Again, that's not a religious title, that's a government title. It becomes a religious title once again the Catholic Church co-opts it. Then the dioceses are divided up into prefectures, under prefects, and then you have military provinces established, usually in the border regions, administered by generals who are called duces, and we get our title duke later on. Of course, we all know about Mussolini as Il Duce, who's trying to resurrect the old Roman Empire.
Why didn't he go north-south to the east-west?
Who?
When he divided it, why didn't he divide?
Why did he divide it that way?
North.
Let me go back to that. Well, how would you do it? Like here?
Yeah.
I don't know how to good answer for that. Why do you do it this way? I mean, I don't know how to good answer for that.
Did you hear what Terry said?
No.
Culture, language, Greek in the east, Latin in the
Yeah,
west.
that's true. Yeah, I got Latin in the west, Greek in the east. I mean, Latin will still be the language of government and trade and things like that. But yeah, the dominant language in this region is still going to be Greek, which we'll talk about here in just a second. Okay. Look, you divide it. Let's get back on that. With good intentions, but I don't think it really holds anything back on it. Look, he's going to be around for several years on the throne, good 20 or so. He will finally retire out. He will live off in a villa, become quite the farmer, apparently, because we have a letter today, it still exists. And then once he's gone and out and retired, it won't be too long before folks are thinking, well, it wasn't too bad under Diocletian. Let's try and see if we can get him back. He's surely bored in retirement by now. So they'll contact him and say, would you consider being emperor again? And literally in the letter he writes in response, and I don't know if he's saying this tongue-in-cheek or not, he basically says, no, I had my shot at this, I think I did okay, and anyway, the crops are coming in, I can't leave the farm now, you should see the cabbages. I can't walk away from these cabbages, for Pete's sake. Now, he may be, I don't know what he's doing, but anyway, maybe his cabbages were fantastic, I don't know. Maybe some of your are gardeners to the point where you might understand why a man would not want to leave his cabbages and run the Roman Empire. He may also decided, you know, I had my shot, I don't want to risk my legacy at this point, but anyway, he steps out. Within a few years, excuse me, we get a guy that matters dramatically for Rome, and that's going to be Constantine. Constantine will rename the eastern capital after himself. You know who men are. And we will see then him converting to Christianity. Lots of good stories about this we're just not going to have time for. But in 312, he goes off on a campaign, I think it's 312, goes off on a campaign to bring himself to power. He claims later he had a vision, a dream, in which he saw the Greek letters Chi Rho, and then a voice telling him basically, go and conquer in the name of Christ, which he does. So technically, he's going to convert to Christianity, and then does win the battle down Mount Milky's Bridge, and then becomes the emperor. From that point, it's going to be a lot easier for Christians, because what Constantine is going to do is basically recognize Christianity and take the pressure off and legitimize Christianity. We reached a point here by the early 4th century with still 175 years, 150 years of Roman history left, imperial history left, and this is becoming a Christian kingdom. For it to be an effective anybody, you probably have to be a Christian. Now, he doesn't get baptized immediately, by the way. What you saw in the film the other day was kind of a deathbed baptism. He just didn't bother until he thought he was going to die. And he thought, well, maybe I'll bother. So he goes out as a baptized believer. And then you'll see Theodosius, by 395, the last year he's going to be emperor, he will actually turn the empire over to his two sons, and really effectively, he's saying, we're probably going to run this as two separate empires. Now, that's just because de facto, it really was two separate empires. The western half and then the eastern half, really running on different tracks ultimately, sometimes not even parallel. So Theodosius will be, after that, the empire's just not going to be the same at all. Once Christianity becomes kind of a...
Did they have anything in common, like currency or language, or not?
Oh yeah, they do. Except that in the eastern half, they have more access to gold. There's going to be a type of coin that's used there that had wide circulation called the Byzance. It's a 65-grain gold coin that they never debased. That's a key part of the equation here, is that they never debased their currency in the East. Now, I'm going really fast here. A lot of what you're seeing in these last few pages are going to be about the Germans coming in. We all know these invasions of the Germans are going to be key in terms of, especially the collapse of the western half of the empire. But I want to make a couple of points here, especially about why. This is the laundry list that I'm going to give you of why the Roman Empire fell. There's a lot of answers. These are the 12 that I think are important. There's been a lot of subcategories to these. These cover a lot of ground. There is what we call the intellectual answer, which says that Rome conquered the world as a republic with republican principles, those things we talked about on Monday, and then they changed those principles or abandoned them to fit an empire, and then once you've lost your the basis for what you were initially, then you've left the whole point. You abandoned it. Your purpose is entirely different. The moral answer, which we always talk about, the license, the luxury. There's going to be laws passed in Rome that ban silk. So these neighbors are going to say, this is killing us. We're getting too soft. What happened to the gravitas? What happened to the sacrifice? What happened to the put up with it? Do it. Give up. The laziness, the decline in character, the decline in discipline. We can fuss about whether we're at that point in our history today. The Christian answer of St. Augustine, that Rome had to go. God pushes Rome out of the way to make room for the new Rome, the new Jerusalem, and that's going to be the kingdom of God. That will be the church family. Okay. Then the Christian answer, number 2, which we said before, Christianity through passive resistance destroys the empire. It can't kill this, what Rome always sees as a subversive influence. And eventually the church wins. The political answer, power. Caesarism, God rulers, that kind of stuff. It's not about public spirit. The failure of civil power to control the army. The army keeps bringing generals onto the throne. Repeatedly. I mean, it's just over and over and over in terms of revolving door stuff. The social answer, class warfare. The fact that slavery undermines so many institutions within the empire. It undermines the work of the free farmers out in the fields. It undermines the free labor of the men in the cities because you can get enslaved cheap. And then what do? And these guys that helped build the republic, these farmer soldiers, nobody gives two hoots about those guys anymore. The men that founded the empire, they leave those guys behind. They replace them with slaves. They don't need those farmer soldiers who put on the gear, go and fight, win the battle, and then go back, take off the gear, go back to farming. They don't need those guys anymore. So class warfare, the fact that slavery is just so far flung, it just destroys incentives. A welfare state, those kinds of things that just, again, undermine the empire. Then the economic answers, look, as the pressures within the empire mean you can't travel from point A to point B, the trade restricts, trade becomes stagnant, low productivity, again, some of that's about slaves. Look, slaves are never really that productive because they're slaves. It's almost always the situation with slaves. They're going to almost always underwork. What's their incentive? Not to get beat. That's their incentive. Scarcity of gold and silver. They debase their coinage in the West so dramatically. They'll take base metals, coat them with precious metals. They'll file around the edges, keep little bags of filings, so the coins kind of get a little smaller as we go along the way there because they're just cutting off parts. Yeah.
See, a lot of that went to the Vatican too, didn't it?
I can't address how much that went to the Vatican at all, so I don't know. The physical answer, look, some of this is just about soil depletion. You work the same fields a long period of time without any kind of fertilizer, you're going to wear them out. Cut down enough trees, you don't replace them, you have deforestation, which means your ground is going to shift, you're going to have swamps, all kinds of stuff, climate change, drought cycles. Some of this is just a natural order in how the planet functions. The pathological answer. There's always outbreaks of plague, malaria, disease is going to be running rampant from time to time. And then lead poisoning too. Lead poisoning is probably a big deal. We don't know what all that means, but they don't get that you shouldn't be using containers with lead. They use lead pipes to move water. They have lead plates. They have lead cups. They have lead utensils. We all know that's not a good idea. It's going to get in your brain. It's going to kill you. How much that's a big factor? Well, we don't know, but certainly it's going to be a factor. Genetic and racial answers. You have the dwindling old Roman stock. Look, when you have people who lived on the farms, the children meant labor. When you move into the city, children become no longer an asset, they're a liability. You know what I'm saying? Economically, they're a liability. They're a cost rather than something about productivity. So you're going to have the upper classes in Rome, they stop having children, they'll practice birth control in a variety of ways. There's going to be a dwindling. The Roman stock, the Roman people that created the Republic in the first place, they're going to become the declining number of people as a percentage of people in Rome. So we come about other folks and the racists. I don't make that sound racist. I'm just saying that the initial Roman stock, they're not going to be breeding the way they used to. They're not going to keep their numbers up. Remember what I said back on Monday? A Roman woman had to produce how many children just to maintain the population? 6. Forget that. You're lucky if you get 1 or 2 out of these guys. What's their incentive? So that's going to be, again, mingling with other folks. And of course, German invasion, you throw that factor in, that's going to be huge. Then the biological, cyclical, mystical answer, an empire is an organization, or an organism. It has a cycle, it has a lifespan, eventually it's going to die, and that's what happens to Rome. All empires die. All kingdoms die. All nation states eventually die. I don't know where we are, but anyway. Then the inevitability answer. Again, just this business of eventually they hit their limits and the natural growth, and then they just retrench and they just begin to fall apart. Does that cover a lot of it for us? Okay, I'm almost out of time. We don't have a lot of time for the German invasions. Just understand that the empire becomes increasingly Germanic as we go along. Theodosius, I mentioned just a minute ago, at the end of the 300s. He's out by 395. The guy who inherits from him is his son-in-law, who's a Vandal. He's German. The last Roman emperor of Roman blood will be in 476. That's why we often have that date as the end of the Roman Empire. Once we have the last Roman emperor of Roman blood, 470, you'll see who and the dates and all kind of stuff. Now look, the other part of this is that when we talk about the decline and the collapse of the Roman Empire, we don't mean the whole empire. We mean the western half of the empire. This is the half that falls apart. This keeps going on. Past 476, this just unravels. Again, most of that's about German invasion. And there's going to be a whole other empire. I'll show you a map, I think I just said. There you go. There's the Germans. Where are they not in the western? They're even in parts of the eastern part of the empire. This battle of Adrianople is key to that.
Do we have copies of those 2 charts?
Yes.
I can make those for you this afternoon or bring them.
That'd be good.
Yeah. If you give me an email address, I can send you the whole thing.
Crystal, would that be able to just post all that stuff or not?
Yeah.
Those 2 charts with,
With the fall, yeah, I'll print out something for you this afternoon. Yeah. This half continues on past 500 AD. That will become the Byzantine Empire. They didn't call themselves the Byzantines, they called themselves the Roman Empire. But it will continue on for the next 1,000 years. This half of the empire does not collapse ultimately until 1453 AD. 1453, 1,000 years past the collapse of the western half of the empire. What event? What event is the collapse of Constantinople by the Muslims? Muslim invasion, where they bring in huge siege cannon Constantinople was a walled city. It had 3 layers of walls. They'd stood there for 1,000 years. The Muslims bring in gigantic cannon capable of launching cannonballs, big granite cannonballs about so big, weighed about 1,000 pounds. And they're just jacking those against the wall. And the problem with the Byzantines is they couldn't put any cannon on their walls because the walls are 1,000 years old. They figured if we put cannon on here, we'll just destroy the walls ourselves just from the reverberation of the cannon. So they can't fire back. And this is the Turks. When I said the Muslims, I mean the Turks, the Seljuk Turks. And they destroy the walls so completely that they'll be able at some points to actually ride in the city on horseback. And remember, by that point, Constantinople is a very Christian city, with the last of the emperors on the throne in the west. That would be McNeese. That would be Constantine X. And when they come in, of course, these guys are given 3 days to do whatever they want to tear up Jacob. And they will begin to tear the city apart. They're going to church after church after church and just rip them up. Take everything that's gold, everything that's silver, everything that's marble, everything they can get their hands on. Anybody been there?
Yep.
At the big church there, the Church of the Highest of Fire, the Church of the Divine Wisdom. They break into that and they just damage it. It's just horrible. In fact, it's so bad that Mehmet, the Sultan, will come into the church of the Highest of Fire, on horseback. And he will look at his men destroying the parts of it. He's so impressed by what he's seeing here in this Christian church, he tells his men to stop damaging it. Wait. This is obviously a house of God. And so he again takes that church and converts it into a mosque. Before he leaves that room, he will get off his horse and on the floor and turn to Mecca. They actually talked about in some texts how there was a pillar and I don't know what this all means, but where the face wasn't pointing the right direction for him. And he will, according to the story, take his hand and insert that into that marble pillar and flip it around so it faced Mecca. And then he'll drop to the floor and the Sultan's brow will touch that marble floor. That's where that church becomes a mosque. And we can worry all day about the impact of the Muslim faith on this planet in terms of terror or whatever, the challenge to the church. We don't have time to talk about that. But this is huge stuff. This is the ultimate end of the last of the Roman Empire. I think that's important. I'll tell you why in real fast. Because this is still a part of the world that was very Greek-based. And I think what that means on one level is it's a part of the world that, at least by language and even by culture, I think, is still very connected to the world of the Bible. Almost anybody in that world then, I think they were talking about 15th century AD, almost any job you had, you could still find in Scripture. You're still using the language of the New Testament. They still had, slaves and chamberlains and kings and the whole bit. They got everything. You could find your place, yourself in the Bible. And a lot of Bibles too, by the way. They estimate, the stories were that in Constantinople, when the Turks came in, there was so many books in that city, you could buy 10 books with any coin. I mean, just the literacy of the Western world is there. That's not just about church, but that's history and philosophy and plays and poetry, and a lot of that got destroyed. This is kind of the last direct, real connection to the world of the Bible. And after that's going to be different.
Well, the collapse of Rome in the East, in the West, was the beginning of the Dark Ages.
Yeah, the collapse of Rome in the West, of course, the beginning of the Dark Ages. Yeah.
The Renaissance came about the time Constantinople.
Yeah, and unfortunately, when these guys are falling apart, these guys almost don't lift a finger. Because that's the different church than us. That's not the Catholic Church. Yes, sir, go ahead.
One of the things with when he came into the Hagia Sophia, he saw them destroying, and he stopped some of the destruction and said, cover them with wood.
Yeah.
And today, they're still covered with that wood.
Yeah.
And they don't know, because they have never allowed
What's
it to come
underneath?
off. But
Yeah.
they know it's still there.
Yeah,
The picture
underneath.
is still there.
They restored some of that. I mean, it's a museum now.
Yeah, it's a museum now. It's neither
So-
church nor mosque today. It's a museum.
It's beautiful.
Okay, that's fine. I'm going to finish up here in just 1 minute. Empires come and go. There's one kingdom that lasts forever. That's the church. We can talk about emperors coming and going. Well, look, the old Soviet Union used to have billboards all over Moscow and other cities that would read the same thing. Lenin lived, Lenin lives, Lenin will live. That's rubbish. We all know there's one who will live. We all know what Hebrews 13:8 says. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. This is the king. You all are part of the kingdom that gets established during the time of the end of the republic, the beginning of the empire. All that is gone, but the kingdom that you are a part of still exists. I hope that's the basis of your life.
Thank you.
Thank you for the week. You guys are always great. I look forward to being back in 2 years.